So I'd like to start Witness the Fitness episode 2, saying Happy Mother's Day, as it is essentially a special edition episode, I suppose you could call
Mother's
it.
Day edition.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, I guess if we're sort of picking up from where we left off previously, it also is kind of fitting as well.
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the last one we were saying, gosh, there's still so much to cover, and I think we did mention sort of talking about trying to figure out how best to be a parent when someone's diagnosed with epilepsy, and then obviously you were 17 when you were diagnosed, so that thing of heading into adulthood and you figuring out how to be as independent as possible and that side of things. Because it's a tricky age. It's a tricky age anyway, without any complications, to figure out how to still be present for your child, but also, you know, let them go enough to become adults and be confident and independent people.
Well, yeah, I think that, that's tricky as well as that person, because it's sort of tricky to kind of put myself back in that frame of mind, but I think at the time I was finding sort of figuring out the level of independence and where I stood with certain things quite sort of an odd process, and it's just sort of going by trial and error a wee bit, so to then have that just made far more complicated. It's tricky to say like how it was at the time, but I think it's a kind of difficult balance of don't know, kind of maybe going back on where you thought you were a wee bit to kind of go, oh, actually, where does this put me as far as independence goes, but also having to remember that as much as you're someone that's just sort of quite out of the blue being diagnosed with epilepsy, and that's a mental and tricky thing to kind of navigate. It's sort of equally as mental, I would imagine, to be a parent in that scenario, or just a sort of a close relative or best friend or whatever it might be. I remember finding it quite tricky, kind of realising, I wonder if like my pals will be alright, sort of still hanging out like just one-on-one with each other, if they're kind of understandably going, I've no idea what I'd do if something were to happen.
And I think that's a very realistic consideration, and true to some extent, though, you know, many of your pals were great, but I do think it's an added thing that people have to consider. And at the age of 17, I think it can be quite frightening for people. I think the thing for you was, you know, when you were having, you know, quite a few tonic-clonic seizures a week, not long after you were first diagnosed, within a year of you first being diagnosed, and you didn't remember them initially, so you were just out the game for the seizure and you didn't remember them, so I don't think you really had that much of an idea of what, well, a lot of people with epilepsy don't, what a seizure is like to be around, because your consciousness has lapsed. But sometimes you definitely would see when someone had seen you have a seizure, that was when they would get a bit freaked out and think, well, if I was on my own with this, how, so if I was there or someone that was used to being around you was there, then it was fine. But the on their own thing was a difficult thing. And I think as well, it's worth mentioning at that point, we lived in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So you were isolated, in terms, you would have been fairly isolated anyway, but but you used to get the train in and out to Glasgow, which would take the best part of an hour, and so there was lots of things that affected in terms of your independence. And also, you and I had always been so close anyway that it was always going to be like something, for you to become a young man and feel independent, and distance had to happen with me in order for you to kind of spread your wings and do whatever it was you wanted to do. And just as we were at that point where that was going to have to happen, and maybe you would give a bit of a push and go, go and do that, go and have adventures, go and see the world, go and be brave. And you were diagnosed with epilepsy, and it was all like, my instincts were all about just like, let me wrap you up in this cotton wool and just hug you and be safe, and I don't want any harm to happen. Now that's what's going on in my head. It's not what I did, but it was my instinctive reaction was obviously about your well-being and you being well, which was very, very protective. And that was what I had to battle with all the time.
It's a strange one because, obviously, there's a big part of me, and I would imagine anyone else in my scenario that would absolutely cherish and hope for that to sort of be the reaction, but at the same time, sort of like, it can be difficult to find that balance of I don't know, like that's enough now kind of thing, or
a bit suffocating, and also I think,
I don't know. Well, I was just going to say that maybe being in the scenario, I might be feeling like those that have witnessed it are maybe under the impression it's far worse than it is.
Yes, I think that is true as well.
So, but you don't want to kind of go like, no, don't sort of, I don't know, not overreact, but it's kind of, it's just that that mix of appreciating people, but also making sure that people know, not to kind of indulge a scenario, and not that anyone did by any stretch, and obviously everyone was getting used to it, including myself, but I was just so sort of worried about like people's, just in general, not so much people I knew well, but just that sort of condescending approach that I don't know, I sort of almost expected it, just largely out with my kind of closer relationships, but also having had you working in care work for many years, and just the stories of kind of these largely adults with kind of various mental conditions being just sort of treated as if they were, I don't know, like infants,
toddlers,
or just I don't know, just the kind of approach that was taken towards them, not even from just kind of the people around them, but like carers and stuff as well. I think it's just so important that anyone that's around those people or is like in the profession of caring for people, it's so important that you don't have like this separate voice, which I've heard elsewhere for that person, and it's I was really sort of
But then, I mean,
I was just aware of it and worried about it, and I haven't really come across that. I haven't had to really experience it myself, but it was just that sort of like, oh God, I hope people realise that that's not the way to go about it. And I was so lucky to have the people around me that I do that just sort of very quickly adapted to, like, he's not really any different other than he sort of occasionally falls to the floor.
yeah.
It was just like he's the same, but he might sort of randomly stop talking or look like he's staring me out.
Yeah.
And I was just so sort of to some extent like proud of my friends and family for just sort of what I felt like was adapting quickly. To
Well,
that,
I mean,
which helped me adapt.
I think it would be fair to say, at least on my part, that quite a lot was fronting it as well. In all honesty, I'm just thinking,
And did it well.
I'm just thinking, if like other parents were to hear this podcast and they're dealing with a child who's been diagnosed with epilepsy, it was far from easy. It wasn't that we just went, oh, we'll carry on as normal. And I know that's not what you're saying it was, but just to be quite clear about that, I mean, sometimes I look back and I cannot believe that I took you down to Glastonbury. I mean, I'm very proud of myself that I did that, but that was quite harrowing on a few levels, because it's such a busy place. Everything is in motion. It's 24 hours. I was working, and you were having a lot of seizures at the time. You did have, at least you had a few while we were there, but you had one right in the middle of a thoroughfare, one of the busy thoroughfares at Glastonbury that I was then, navigating and keeping, making sure the crowds could see not to walk where you were lying. I totally was like a big cage round about you, and I was really glad we went to Glastonbury, and I was really glad you got to go because you'd been a few times, and it was a real thing of, if we don't do this, it sort of hits quite hard that epilepsy was going to stop us doing that. That would be what would have stopped us doing that, and I didn't want that to happen. But when I think about how many seizures you were having at the time,
it seems crazy,
and it does seem quite crazy. I mean, I was exhausted after it, but we were on it, and you were safe. And
actually, I don't really remember it.
No, you were just kicking about, doing your thing, as I was herding around in the background and always making sure that there was someone about, so that if you were to have a tonic-clonic, that there was someone who was happy to be that person that was going to make sure you were safe. It was me a lot of the time, but I didn't want it to be me all of the time because that would have been rubbish for you. So, it was a bit of organising that went on there.
Yeah, organisation and Glastonbury, I don't think are often used in the same sentence. Never mind.
And we had
mental condition in the mix.
And we had little spots as well. It was like, okay, they've got their caravan down there, so if he's down there, that's where we go. They've got their tent there, so if he's down there, that's where we go.
Yeah, I think that's commendable approach. But as I say, I was sort of forgetting that we'd been since the previous. The previous, which was
It was just after it was when
yeah,
you had your first seizure. I know. I don't know I don't know whether that was the next year or 2 years. I think it was just the next year. It must have been just the next year because you were having a lot, and that tapered off after about a year and a half.
Yeah, well, that's what I've sort of mentioned to a few people as well, is that at first, like there was sometimes seizures that it seemed like sort of days worth of recovery early on.
More than 24 hours.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, since then it's sort of, it's only got shorter and shorter, and largely I feel like the seizures themselves have tended to get shorter and shorter themselves. Obviously there's the occasional that
every now and again a wee sort of breakthrough type thing.
The length kind of varies, but I think the most recent one was sometime last year and lasted about 10 seconds.
That's the one in your bedroom?
As far as I remember, and previously, like early on, they've been over 2 minutes as far as I can remember. So
I think the longest you had was about 3 minutes. Which, can feel like an eternity, especially when you're new to the experience.
Yeah, and it's so difficult to tell. From my perspective, I didn't realise as well that it was super unusual to be conscious during a seizure. I guess after so much time of kind of refusing anything to do with it, any information.
Yeah, you didn't want any info at all, which is another tricky thing to navigate as a parent, because then I was in the position where I knew more than you because you didn't want to know anything.
Well, I guess it felt like as well that, it still occasionally, but definitely at the time, it sort of seemed to me that any time I kind of went into any detail, things like my health kind of tended to get worse, and I was like, well, that's not coincidence.
I don't think it was.
The less I approach that, the better.
But it was always going to need unpacked at some point. I think that was the thing. It was always just like sitting there because you were really naturally going through a process of coming to terms with what was going on, accepting what was going on. So many stages, and you just weren't ready to like get all the info. And some people never are.
Well, yeah, as well, the more of sort of more recently, I guess. I mean, I would say years by now, but the more I kind of came round to actually figuring some facts out about it, the more I realised just how sort of individual it is to each person that has it. Because like I was about to say, I didn't realise that sort of having consciousness throughout a seizure is sort of very rare. I was just going to say that I could sort of come around afterwards and be going, that must have been about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and it'd be like, that was 25 seconds, Barney. But yeah, obviously for someone witnessing it that's potentially first time witnessing it, they will most likely go, it was far longer than it actually was.
I think we said that in the last podcast, didn't we? That it was like generally if people would report back to me the first time they'd ever seen you have a seizure, it would always be like way longer than any seizure I'd ever seen you have, but they would inevitably not have timed it and just went, it must have been about 5 minutes. It must have been, and I would think it wasn't 5 minutes, but it does, seem that much longer while you're in it. But in terms of being overmothered or
Mm.
overmanaged. you know, for, there's set. I mean, I know I can be guilty of that. That I'm quite on it with. Have you drank? I mean, in fact, I said it before we did this podcast. I was like, have you had plenty to drink and eat?
Yeah.
Because there's so many things that you figure out. Can be triggers or can predispose to some activities. So if you're not sleeping, if you're not eating, if you're not drinking enough, if you're stressed out your head, things like that, you go, well, it could be more likely that something would go on here. And I know that sometimes I have managed that to the nth degree that must have really been quite annoying at times. So yeah, have you any thoughts on that you would like to share?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, I tend to be in at least one person's company a lot of the time, or just that there's someone close by. And obviously, in the scenario right now, we're sort of stuck inside a lot of the time. Obviously, I'm staying with my girlfriend Shelby at the minute, who is about as sort of
She manages well
on it and double checking it as you do. She is quite often sort of kind of called me out, or just kind of asked if I'm alright, and there's been nothing going on at all. It's maybe I don't know, I'm like sat looking at the computer,
well,
and it can look like
you're quite
blank faced, or
you're quite contemplative if you're being thoughtful about what you're about to say next.
It looks like
you just stare into middle distance, and
Yeah.
I know that both Shelby and I sort of go, oh, occasionally we catch each other and we just look at each other, and then we go, oh yeah, it's fine. So yeah, I can recognise that.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, and then obviously certain family and friends I'm about less, then just sort of naturally aren't as aware, and in some ways I'm sort of like, oh well, yeah, what if something does happen and I've not got someone that's kind of even checking in when nothing's going on, but at the same time I'm like, well, it's quite nice to kind of know that they're not going to be kind of, I don't know, over my shoulder a bit.
Also, it's different. It's different having your mum over managing and checking on you
Right.
from having your girlfriend. You know what I mean? In terms of as we were talking about, independence and that kind of thing, and not keeping you in this kind of childish place, which was my real worry when you first had your diagnosis, was that I didn't want that, the dynamic then being that I'm constantly trying to look after you, double check, make sure you're safe, need to know where you are all the time. At one point you had a thing on your phone where we knew where you were all the time because you were falling down a lot, and I was having to come in the car and pick you up. So there was a lot of things that, just as you should have been, going, right, Mum, I'm off. Yeah. You and I were even more closely connected.
Perfect timing.
So yeah, so that thing of trying to figure out not, allowing you to move on from being a child at that age is
well,
yeah, it's quite the navigation.
As it's happened more recently as well, I don't think I realised at the time, and only sort of figured out how kind of thankful I was for that, that early on, especially with, like, because I wasn't paying any attention quite deliberately, but that you were looking into various kind of benefits and things that I could be eligible for, and you only said later on that it wasn't totally necessary either, but you just sort of didn't want it to come across as that's just the way things are going to be from now on, is that it's not like it's being given money rather than making my own way, which again was sort of that was starting to come into the picture. It was like
so like around the
I've
benefit.
not worded it particularly well, but
you mean around the choices I made around the benefit system sort of thing?
Yeah, we're just kind of leaving it at first and kind of going, well, the option's there. If maybe down the line it feels like that might be the thing to do. That it was very much.
I don't.
It's not. That might kind of put in my head that right. It's because epilepsy and epilepsy's that's what I'm dealing with from now on.
Well, it was a lot to do with the fact that I know how thorough the sort of application processes and things are for these benefits, and absolutely, I think if you it's really brilliant that support is there from the system for people that have these conditions, and I don't at all suggest that people should not claim what they're due as far as that goes. But when you were 17, I felt that we could get by, and I didn't want that to be on the back of your diagnosis. Like, so you get this diagnosis of epilepsy and then you have to jump through hoops proving how disabled you were. And again, that's absolutely, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all, but I just felt like at the age you were at as a young man, it could tie in with how you defined yourself and how you identified with that, because that was what you were going to have to repeat over and over again to the government to try and get the financial support that was available to you. So we left it for a good couple of years.
Decent amount of time,
but then, because there was so many other changes going on, because my relationship broke up, and then we moved to Glasgow, which was a brilliant move for you. And then we had a couple of houses that we rented before we moved to the house I'm in just now. So there was a lot of changes happening as well. So it wasn't purely just that eventually. But it did, rightly or wrongly, it did feel, it felt important to me at the time that didn't become, because of their tone, not because of yours or mine, but because of their tone. I just didn't want you to then go, all right, I'm really limited. This is what I am. I wanted you to accept the diagnosis and come to terms with the diagnosis, and then you go through that process and get the support that was there for you. And I was lucky in that financially we could do that, and but we may not have been as lucky, and then we would have just worked it out anyway in a different way.
Well, I remember just sort of when we did get around to sort of chatting about it previously, that the idea of sort of I don't know, kind of the word that comes to mind is labeling, and sort of I don't know, it's then that your kind of your approach to yourself, and I think it's it would be tricky for anyone to kind of completely I don't know, not have it as a part of who they are from that sort of point onwards. And I've said since, and definitely more recently as well, but just rather than rather than Barney is epileptic, it's just Barney's got epilepsy. If that
I was actually, honestly, literally about to say the exact same thing, Barney. The subtle difference in those two definitions. And I actually remember talking to a guy at the epilepsy hospital in Govan about that as well, and because he hated being described as an epileptic. he was a guy that had epilepsy.
Yeah.
And it's that he's the guy he is. That's half an hour, by the way.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah. And that is a really subtle differentiation, but it's a really important one, I think. And yeah, and I think that is what you do. It's just like it's part of who you are. You have epilepsy, but it's not the everything. It's not what
totally, and
governs your entire life.
Well, we mentioned the other day that there was sort of chat. I don't know how we can ended up on it, but it was like, ideally it just wasn't sort of, you didn't have to think about it at all. Like, if you could have continued without it, that would be the ideal situation, kind of thing. And kind of immediately I realised that actually I'm in a lot of ways quite thankful for it, which sounds kind of messed up, but there's a lot of things that have come from it that I probably wouldn't have done or experienced had that not been the case.
Yeah. As well, we were saying that the other day about even like Samba Yabamba and all those kind of things, as I was desperately trying not to wrap you in cotton wool, and I was like, right, we need to find things he can do to go places, and that's, some of those things have been just such brilliant additions to your life. Yeah,
there's definitely things that are a big part of of what I do on a sort of regular basis, and the people that the people that I'm sort of
you're involved with,
new people that I've met. These things I couldn't say whether or not they would have happened, but I know that.
And would you have met your girlfriend?
I know they definitely only did because of the scenario that I was in. And yes, of course, the girlfriend scenario could not be more thankful, obviously.
Me too.
Well, it seems everyone, really. Which, is good. I've heard sort of, you hear about nightmare scenarios of folk not getting on, and that's not been the case at all. So,
folk not getting on?
Well, you used to hear like about parents going, no, they're not good enough for.
Oh yeah.
For my kid, kind of thing, and it was just it was never even.
No, number one fan.
Never even a thought at all. But relationships, friendships, people that I've met through various different things, and getting involved with Epilepsy Scotland. I sort of wanted to make sure I did this second episode we're recording just now, in time for Purple Day, and just having gotten involved with them. I've met a lot of really cool folk through that, and again, it was another thing where any sort of organisation based around epilepsy or just forums or whatever, I was like, nope, having no part of that. And now I've gotten around to it, and of course, just lovely people, and just, I don't know, I guess,
really interesting.
Just taking, I mean, it took a long time, but taking time to actually come around to going, it's worth sort of knowing about, and it's not, I don't know what the word is, but it was just that kind of accepting that it's something that I'm living with, and
loads of lovely, cool folk are all living with. I mean, I think the thing that my biggest learning thing about epilepsy when you were diagnosed was just how many people have some form of epilepsy, which I had. I think I'm fairly tuned in with a lot of medical things, and I had no idea it was as common as it is. Like it's so so common. So and then all on a whole massive spectrum, and as you rightly say, everybody's got it. No two people are the same.
Yeah.
And then I guess one shout out for a really lovely young woman that I met not long after I'd started working with people with epilepsy, who didn't know I had a son with epilepsy, and we were sitting chatting away, and she was talking about her relationship with her mum and how her mum was kind of smothering her a bit, and she was at uni, and you were both the same age, and she'd gone off to visit a relative in Australia, and she just went home and said to her mum, "I've bought a ticket to Australia," because she felt she just had to. She was trying to grow up. She wanted to grow up, and of course her mum was quite stressed about that. But she went and did it. But I just thought she was just it was a real eye opener for me. It was quite a significant point for me, really, just to sort of try and see things a bit more from your perspective, and
I totally had that,
and that's why I think
I was then like, right, I need to stop thinking about it as great, I've got epilepsy, to I've got loads of amazing people around me that have sort of adapted to the fact that that's what's going on.
Well, including yourself,
you've talking to.
Well, it's true. I mean, I think you've really been incredible, and well, Mother's Day and all that, could not be prouder. So yeah, that's quite a nice place to finish, isn't it?
Well, yeah, guess so. We can call it the slightly longer, because it's the special edition one, I suppose.
Extra special. We've done extra special 5 minutes or something on the end there.
Yeah. That's a lucky audience. Nice one. Well, yeah, who knows? We may convene another time.
Well, I do hope so.
And, witness the fitness. Over and out.
Good night.